So the idea of this presentation is to go over some of the tool sets that AT&T uses and take those tool sets, give you an idea of how we utilize them and how we operationalize them. We're going to be going into things like database mining, like how we extract this information, what groups we push this out to, what information that we're trying to extract, and what we're doing with it. So our goal with our two tool sets has always been to provide protection against anomalous data for our network and its customers. Our primary focus has always been our network. The reason being is because if our network doesn't exist, your network doesn't exist. So most of the tool sets that we utilize, you'll hear about some offerings and things like that, and typically we provide these things in the core first and then push them out into the customer level after we've had some certain amount of success in the core. So what we define anomalous data as is infiltration of viruses, essentially hundreds, thousands of computers getting taken over, and then spreading of worms, all those hundreds of thousands of computers then spreading out to other computers. Denial of service attacks, effects of route theft. With denial of service attacks, we also include phishing schemes in that, because even though typically a phishing scheme isn't a denial of service attack, often the ramifications of a phishing scheme can be a denial of service attack. The effects of route theft, what happens when somebody starts advertising your block inadvertently, whether it's malicious or not malicious. Port scanning, not necessarily going into the socket, but just scanning for open ports. Oh, sure, Susan. Network enumeration, actually going into the daemon, trying commands, things of that nature. The effects of an exploited vulnerability. So when you do have a system that has some type of vulnerability that can be opened up to breach, how do you protect it? How do you track that data that could take out devices? How we define protection. We consider it 5 components, and the first one being prevention, and that's how to prevent anything from happening in the first place. Prediction. Everybody's going to have some gaps at some moment in time. Can we predict, based on these gaps, where an attack is going to occur, where we're more susceptible to breach at? Detection. Once somebody launches anomalous traffic towards us, can we detect it? And then mitigation, kind of the end all, because the first 3 things do you absolutely no good if it does get through, if you can predict it, if you can detect it, if you can't mitigate it, all your efforts have been worthless, right? And then finally, which a lot of people leave out, is prosecution. This stuff's never going to come to an end unless you can catch the people that are doing this. So what is prevention? Prevention entails the ability to prevent somebody from launching an attack against your network. Things like this include spoof prevention at the edge. We generally have global access lists as well as customer filters and unicast RPF in some areas where we can. These are all linked into our provisioning system to ensure that every customer has an inbound ACL on their link so that they can't spoof. This is then gone over in audits, so we download our configurations 4 times daily. We ensure that each customer has those access lists. They make sure they match to the provisioning database. Route suppression and dampening. So route suppression, we don't announce what we don't have to. If our NCC or something like that, our operations center, if there's no need to advertise that address space out to the internet, why do it? If you have a /16, why advertise it if you're only using a /20? Reduce that footprint. There's no sense having a large footprint out there if you're not using it. Routing protocol protection. We have systems, we have sessions going with other providers, so we're constantly looking at external views of our routes. We perform audits against those routes. So once again, we go back into our database and we say, okay, so 12/whatever has been routed this way. If we see a route that pops up on somebody else's network, we want to know about this, and we especially want to know about it if it's an infrastructure route. This is probably too small for you to read. You can pull it up on the web, but I'm going to go through a couple of them. It's kind of what I was going over before. We break our network into peers, customers, and then our own infrastructure and data centers. And so within our data centers, it's kind of the typical thing. We do spoof prevention for our own data centers. Most people rely to say, well, they're my systems, I know they're not spoofing. But what happens when a patch didn't get pushed out or something like that? What happens if a breach does occur and they can spoof? It can be a good source if you're doing access list audits to find out if something's been breached. Don't just rely on your intrusion detection systems or your internal intrusion detection systems. There's things like ACL counters that can work just as well. I mean, not just as well, but can provide additional information. Once again, route suppression and footprint reduction. Our data centers, if we don't have to announce it, we're not going to, and we're not going to announce all of our blocks if we don't have to. Simple things, strong authentication where you can, stateful packet inspection where you can, deep packet inspection where you can, IDS sensors, try to get the payload, try to look at signatures. Secure remote access where you can, separation of services, and just general best practices. For customers, spoof prevention of management blocks. We have our operations centers, we use a static set of address blocks, as I'm sure most of you do. So when those ingress filters from our customers, not only are we doing spoof prevention for our customers, but we're doing implicit denies to make sure that they can't send as our address blocks. They can't send to our infrastructure blocks. Route dampening, control plane protection. Receive ACLs have been great from Cisco. We really appreciate things like that. Specific route filtering, limit checks, AS limit checks, things like that. Watch your routing protocols. For our peers, pretty much the same thing. Spoof prevention for management blocks. I know a lot of people, if they can do spoof prevention on their customers, it's sometimes hard to do spoof prevention for your peers because you don't want to have to, I don't want to have to call Chris, or Chris doesn't want to have to call our peering coordinator or whatever and say, okay, now we're going to start announcing this block. So, go ahead and update your route filters on that. So there's generally a trust. And if you're not running unicast RPF on that, then you really don't have any spoof prevention. So you want to make sure that your management blocks are protected. Make sure that if your management blocks, your NCC or your NOC address space is 10.10. whatever, then you go ahead and deny that as a source from anywhere that you can't safeguard spoofing at. Authentication, encryption of routing protocols, reverse path checking if you can, route dampening again, control plane protection once again, route filtering of Martians. Let's not let the 10 dots and the 172s of the world go across our peering links. And once again, limit checks, check for AS limits, make sure people are sending the right communities. So some of our prevention tool sets, we're really big on configuration auditing, global access list audits. We typically try to do, so we have a specific access list that we've templated for peers. And so that's something that we would call a global access list. In other words, it's applied everywhere on our peering interfaces. So we audit those, we pull them down 4 times a day. We make sure that they coincide with our provisioning database and make sure that they're correct. Route map audits, same thing, VTY, con, and aux. We have a standard template, VT access list 1 for Telnet, access list 2 for SNMP. Make sure those are audited 4 times a day. Make sure they match the provisioning database. Service audits. Make sure that services are shut down. No reason to run a web server on your router. AAA audits. Make sure that every router is doing TACACS. Make sure that nobody's tampered with the TACACS configurations. So moving on to prediction. And this is kind of a tough one. You know, everybody prediction. You know, how can you do it? And you know, really, there's no. I'm not going to say that prediction's 100%, but there are some things that you can do of a predictive nature, and what you can do, it can help. Why if you don't feel like it can be 100%, that just doesn't make sense. If you think you can get 20% out of it, utilize what you can. So prediction is a proactive approach to dealing with anomalous traffic. Prediction does not necessarily forecast when an attack will occur, but can forecast things like type, strength, and sometimes who's going to get attacked. So typically what we do is we do analysis of port scamming and enumeration. So we look at breaches that are occurring, not necessarily for our MIS customers. If we do have like a managed service or something like that where a customer does have an IDS and they're permitting us to off-ramp those IDS alerts to our systems, of course we'll utilize them. But we're also looking at our own systems from our data centers and stuff like that. Detection of distributed agents, so DOS attacks. Dark space analysis, looking for worms. So some of the systems that we use are honey-nuts, because a honey-nut's going to provide the payload. If you're looking at a virus or a worm that's released in the wild, you want something that's going to actually respond so you can get a payload. A good example is a phishing scheme or something like that. If you have a customer who can't get payload because their entire network's getting overloaded, dummy that thing up on a honey nut and reroute it. Get the payload for the customer, things like that. Dark space collection. We have both private address space that we route and public address space that we route. Blocks next to MSOs, blocks off of our web hosting and stuff like that. We change it up every 4 weeks. We move those blocks to something else so that if attackers go, oh, 12.123. whatever, that's AT&T's dark address space, we're not going to touch that stuff. Well, we change it up every 4 weeks to make sure that they'll have to keep count and try to keep up. Quartering list. It's probably a new term for people, and it's kind of an internal term for us. Whenever we capture a CNC, we don't do a perimeter black hole. We sinkhole it into a high capacity area, and what we do is we track those flows that are going to that CNC, and we log that, and we take that list, and that list gets automatically put up to our abuse team, who then can do whatever the hell they want with it, hopefully go and fix people's computers. Intel gathering, external intel gathering, great forums like NSPSec. We have our abuse team that looks at the emails and stuff like that. If they see something that it involves 7018, they input it into the correlation database so that we have a record of it. Intel gathering, the abuse calls that we take, those get put into the correlation database. Metadata collection, so all of our traffic analysis that we're getting from NetFlow, once again, gets put into the correlation database. Now, I don't want you to think that this correlation database is like one, single database. It's a just database that links a lot of other databases. Deep packet collectors, so your remote distributed captures or firewalls. We do what's called telescoping. So we'll divert traffic into a sinkhole area, once again into a high capacity area, and then we'll encapsulate it either with GRE or MPLS. And this isn't, a lot of you have probably heard of scrubbing before. This isn't necessarily scrubbing. This is just payload that we want to look at because it's suspicious for some other reason. So we want to have a way, without having to deploy some remote packet sniffer out somewhere, that we can just use our routing protocol, go ahead and divert that and take a look at it, and there's no impact to the customer. So data mining. So with this correlation database, a good example of things that you can do with data mining, customer X is a financial institution. He's just gotten DOS attacked, some blackmail scheme. Customer Y, another financial institution, is attacked 4 days later. So once you start populating this database, you start to find some interesting things. That the biggest day of the week that financial institutions get attacked is Wednesday. Things like that. So it does lead to some predictive nature, and so there is some capabilities there that if you're an ISP that has a large set of X type of customer, that you could provide some predictive nature to that customer and say, listen, we've had, and you can do this anonymously. You don't have to say customer, whatever the name is. You can do customer X, who happens to be the same type of customer that you are. And customer Y and Z and A and B, and they've all gotten attacked. And it's happened either on Tuesday or Wednesday, and it's all times it's happened at 4 o'clock or 7 o'clock or something like that, and it's come from the breakdown of these ASs with these source addresses, and you can provide some pretty good information. And it doesn't always work out, but I think for those of you who are customers, I think you appreciate it. For those of you who are ISPs, I think it's something that we can furnish to you. Quartering list. So, like I mentioned, if we do discover a CNC, we essentially replicate it and we black hole it or sinkhole it. So the quartering lists are typically automatically generated to our abuse of what records for what customers are infected for cleanup. But the quartering list can also provide something of a predictive nature. So if you have a CNC captured, generally you'll have a pretty shallow curve of when these bots start dropping off. But you can easily tell when all these bots get pulled or reinfected by the same person, because he's got a list generated of who he's infected. So he immediately knows who to go out and get again, and so he's going to send them to another controller. And you can see a rapid decline in the infected hosts from your quartering list. New denial of service attacks can then be analyzed. You can forefront who the repetitive infected clients are. You can capture flow data on these repetitive clients, and that you can monitor them for what new command and control platforms. We've recently done some studies that show, it's the same 82,000 machines that are launching these denial of service attacks. Plus or minus a certain percentage for new ones. It's growing, but it's the same host over and over and over again. And so if it's the same host, if you can track them, it only makes sense that you can easily find new command and control modules. Dark space and honey nets. So dark space and honey nets can be used to predict trends in worm activity. If any of you are familiar with one of the tools that we use is PeakFlow has some dark address capability. We have our own systems that look at dark address space. You look at unique IP and protocol pairs, and you baseline this activity. So if you have unique ports and protocols, we get roughly about 10,000 hosts per hour. And that can easily be translated in 5 minutes or whatever you want to base it on. But if a new worm breaks out, then it's pretty easily discernible when you go from 10,000 unique packets up to 80,000 unique packets. So once again, you can kind of use this as a predictive nature. It's not necessarily, I mean, it's detection, but it's also a prediction because it's giving you the curve, and you can react on it before it really builds up and starts taking out networks. Yep.
So with dark space, are you seeing more people skipping over dark space? Are they getting smart enough to figure out that it's dark space? Or are they pretty much still hitting everything on the net equal?
So I think it depends. It depends upon what you're using as dark space. If you're dummying up, just for like your internal customers, your internally routed customers, like you're dummying up 96/6 or something like that, I think a lot of people are just skipping over that. But if you're using dark address space, that's real address space, and reachable and routable, then that's why we're switching it up every 4 weeks, is to make sure that they're hitting different dark address space all the time. And we do leave some Class Cs static and that never change, just so that we can get a baseline over that. And but I don't think they're avoiding that dark address space, because this is, so let me kind of take a step back. So we have dark address space to try to pick up on port scanning and enumeration, and that's the dark address space that we switch every 4 weeks. And then we have dark address space that's really just for warm activity. What white noise, what white internet noise is like, moving around out there. And as far as that's concerned, I mean, I think that can remain pretty static because there's no one that's controlling that. They're just randomly propagating. So detection, the ability to make aware of the appropriate parties that anomalous traffic is transiting the network. I use anomalous traffic a lot because I hate using denial of service, because I think it's, when you talk about these things, prevention and prediction, you're not just talking about denial of service. You're talking about, what we covered before, worms, enumeration, port scanning, and things that can eventually lead to denial of service. I mean, obviously, if somebody does a port scan, they enumerate, then they infect somebody, and then they become a client. They connect up to a CNC, and they launch a denial of service attack. So it's kind of one and the same. It's all for the same cause, right? So detection. We have measurement servers. These are typically servers that are staged in each city. We call them SNRCs. I'm sure everybody else has other names: data centers, hubs, whatnot. These servers send out ICMP, UDP, and TCP traffic to all the other measurement servers, and they collect packet loss, jitter, and everything else. SNMP traps, we all have them. The routers send them out. They've been around for a long time. Traffic analysis threshold alerts. We have TA systems that just typically look for bandwidth. Where is bandwidth being overutilized at? Dark space thresholds, as I mentioned earlier, your 10,000 packets, and it remains steady over this X time period. Intrusion detection systems that we have out there. Once again, that's the capture payload. Firewall alerts, what's bouncing off our firewalls, what's out there charging up against our deny rules. Route auditing, looking at our peers, making sure that they're not trying to announce things that we don't want them to. DOS detection, looking at flow records, looking at backscatter. And these all go into an alert center. And this is where we do some ticket correlation. And this we'll go into a little bit on how this alert center, how this correlation really helps operations. So, as I mentioned, so we have measurement servers. The servers send out ICMP to UDP and TCP, request other measurement servers around the network, report back latency. So these can isolate problems within a general region. If you do a cross out, so between your city pairs, New York to Dallas, New York to San Fran, New York to so-and-so, And you take your measurement servers and you have certain latency thresholds or packet loss thresholds. You can have them alarm based on city pairs. So if you're having latency between San Francisco and LA or something like that, well, that can be picked up by a measurement server just simply by it breaking threshold for latency. So now you know that there's a problem between San Fran and Los Angeles. So SNMP traps can isolate and correlate over utilization of CPU or memory. So now you get an SNMP trap, and let's say it comes from, you know, the LA router. So now we have it isolated, not just San Fran or LA. It's most likely going to be LA. Traffic analysis can correlate CPU and memory increases and overutilization of backbone links. So now we have our TA system that reports, well, we have overutilized POSIP link on that LA GSR. So now we've got it isolated to a link on the router within the city. Dark space thresholds, DOS detection, and route audits. So this can isolate or correlate that the overconsumption of the resource is a direct result of a route change, a worm, or a denial of service attack. A route change has occurred. We're performing audits on our route database. We realize that, well, so-and-so just did a major shift in traffic, and that's why the utilization is out of whack. We look at our dark address space. Oh, new worm came in from starting over in China Telecom. That appears in the LA, so, well, that might be the cause of it. Denial of service attack. We're looking at our flow information, which, so we see a denial of service attack, which is on a customer hanging off of the LA router. So additional heuristics can be performed. So one of the things that we do, typically our systems are looking for denial of service attacks at our peering perimeter. So if you have packets coming across from peering perimeter, how do you know where they're destined to? So you can take a look at a couple alerts. So let's say you get 10.10.10.1/32 as the destination CIDR that's under attack. But, you know, typically with some of the DDoS systems, at least ours, we don't just have one alert. We might have, you know, 20 or 30 anomalies going on at any one time. So we don't expect our operations center to sit there and take every alert and trace route it to see if that's the one that's hitting the LA GAR, to see if that's the one impacting it, right? So what we do is we take that CIDR, we take that 10.10.10.1, and we look in our historical BGP tables and we find out who the originator is. Really simple thing to do. You don't want to do it online because the denial of service attack could force that route to withdraw. So you need to look at something historically. So we get to DDoS attack, and the first thing we do is we start looking at additional heuristics of it. We look at the originator. We try to go to that originating router. So once we have the originator, we now know that the BGP advertisement for this came out of that LA router. So then we try to attach to the originator. If we can't attach, well, we're going to send an alarm, just a generic alarm, router down, which we already have from the SNMP trap, but, you know, correlation is the key. It's not just because your operations guy, when he gets an SNMP trap for the router down, he doesn't know what caused it. But if he gets another ticket in from a denial of service attack on the same router, well, now he has something, you know, he can just immediately black hole it. So we try to attach to that router. If we can get into the router, then we just do an IP route lookup and see what interface that is routed to. So now we have a customer interface. So now we can generate a ticket automatically, not just on the router and not just on the interface, but we now know what specific customer is getting impacted by this. Dark space threshold, route audits to determine whether or not this was an impact due to operations or perhaps route theft. I think I just kind of went over this stuff. Counting logs can be data mined to determine what entries were made. So kind of taking a step back. So let's say, you know, that LA was impacted because of some routing change that occurred in the network. So if we do detect that routing change occurred, we immediately go to our TACAX logs. And we say, well, what router was this modified on? What was the exact command that was put in there? So that we can immediately mitigate that problem and remove that configuration that created the problem. So this is kind of a process example of how it's all put together. So all remote locals report latency to ABC local, which ABC local is the SNRC of the city. SNMP trap is sent from hub router A of ABC local. Traffic analysis reports that the hub router A's uplinks are overutilized. Upstream DOS detection systems report that a UDP fragment flood is destined towards ABCD/32. Route database reports that the originator of this /32 was access router A of ABC local. And a trouble ticket is populated with all this information from all the alerts. And operations proceeds with the information because they have plenty of correlation to react, and they black hole it. So mitigation. So mitigation is what I consider, and sometimes it's tough convincing your company of this, but you have all these fancy detection tools and everything like that, but once again, it does you absolutely no good. So mitigation is the ability to stop the attack or very at least minimalize it once it's been detected. I'm happy at most times if I can stop 90% of it. So, whatever you can get, right? Generally accepted terms of mitigation, black hole it, packet filter it, and kind of a recent one out is packet diversion. So I know we've had plenty of sessions with black holing, so I'm not going to go into that. Packet filtering, I think we all need to do, or we need to do that, or we all know how to do that. But obviously, there's, depending upon what systems that you're running, you can't filter on packet length. You can't filter on a lot of different things. So sometimes you really can't mitigate with just doing packet filtering, and packet filtering is not dynamic. If the vector of the attack changes, then you have to go back and change the access list. So packet diversion kind of takes care of this. Black holing, it's like amputating an arm. The customer's completely out of operation. If the vector's triggered on DNS and the customer tries to move it, it's just going to follow it. So, black holing, the only time we really use black holing is if we have an MSO or a dial-up account. It's on DHCP. We get an attack, black hole it, minimize the collateral damage that's occurring, take it out of the DHCP pool and leave it, because what's the point on trying to trace down all these broadband attacks or trying to filter them, right? Tracking them back something else. Packet filtering, once again, the capabilities. What capabilities do you have? And so packet diversion tries to encapsulate both of these. So just examples of black holing. So perimeter black hole, we're blocking it as it goes into the backbone. With filter mitigation, typically we're blocking it at the access router. If we can get the ingress points, we'll try to block them up at the ingress points. But obviously, if with some of these distributed attacks, I know with us we have a couple hundred peering interfaces just domestically alone. We don't want to go out and touch every peering router to go put packet filters up there, because then something really bad can happen. So you have packet scrubbing, and this is essentially kind of the lowdown on packet scrubbing. So attached to our core, we have an OC192 core, so we figured the best place to put it is where you have the most bandwidth capacity. If you're trying to do it down at the customer prem, what's the sense? If the customer has a T3, it's going to get overwhelmed, right? If you put it at a data center or something like that, then you have some concerns of what else is going into that data center. Is your web hosting going into that data center? Is your VoIP traffic going into that data center? So we figured the best way to do this is attach it straight to the OC192 network. Put it in multiple locations and disperse it. So when I show the picture here, you have just one core router, but we actually have it in multiple different locations to handle the distribution. So, and I'll go a little bit more into packet diversion later in the presentation. So tool sets for mitigation. Dedicated and centralized black hole routers provide a centralized repository for malicious routes. The good thing about this is you can offload that information. You can provide organizations such as abuse is who's black hole and what tag are they receiving. So you have with these different methods you have different tags. So if you're setting up a black hole infrastructure, you might have tag 666 for your perimeter black hole, or tag 911 for your diversion black hole, or tag 2020 to bring it into a sinkhole or something like that. So there's if you have a single repository, then it's just a little bit easier to form list off to abuse or customer care, so that when the customer calls up and says, why am I not receiving any traffic to this IP, and they can go, oh well, he's tagged 666, or he's tagged this, so he's a CNC, he's tagged this, so he's been triggered for AEP evaluation or something like that. Provides stability because it's not part of the backbone. One of the worst nightmares in the world is, like, let's say you start putting all these black hole tags on a production router that's also carrying customer traffic, and all of a sudden this router gets isolated and all those routes get withdrawn. So that would probably not be a good thing. Can be utilized for sinkholing. So at least with one of our facilities, we have a forensics facility behind it that's high capacity area that we can bring things into and take a look at a little bit closer. BGP sessions can be established to it. If you have one router, you can do BGP sessions to it. So if you have other systems that require black holing, let's say you have some type of detection system that detects denial of service attacks just destined towards MSOs. Well, it's almost safe because they're on DHCP that you can say, let's go ahead and automate this and have it automatically black holed and removed from DHCP. So it's a little bit easier to talk to detection facilities. BGP sessions can be established to other internal systems. I just kind of mentioned that. So going back to diversion. Like I said, we have scrubbing facilities that are attached up to our OC192 backbone. We have detection facilities that look at flow. So this is normalized traffic. The flow is just going to be destined, going to the customer as normal. The attack starts. So now we're seeing the net flow of those malicious packets. And you'll see the detection facility has a BGP session with the scrubbing facility, so it can send out a route announcement. So it sends out that route announcement, does two things. So it sends out the route update to have the scrubbing facility, the next hop change. Same thing like you would with black holing, only you're diverting it into a scrubbing facility. We use BGP Anycast, that way we get a load distribution. So I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with UDP Anycast. This is a bastardized version of TCP Anycast, because the scrubbing facility, and we can talk about this, because you don't have to have the three-way handshakes in the scrubbing facility that has to keep state in the scrubbing facility. You can use the same address over and over again. So that way you get a good East Coast, West Coast distribution. So the route update gets sent, to have it sent to the scrubbing facility. At the same time, an alert notification gets sent to our operations group notifying of the denial of service attack. Also, when that route update happens, all of our systems that are looking at our BGP tables also note the change, because the next hop changed. So now we know that the diversion has taken place and that it's propagated throughout the network. Also, if a customer enacts this, so you can set up some portal capability or something like that, if they send out the announcement, whether it's from a portal or from their router or something, once again, you're looking at your routing table and you note the next hop change, and you can base an alarm on that. That way you know when the customer is diverting traffic on his own accord. Because when people divert traffic, things can get congested, and you should let your operations center just know about that. So now we're diverting the traffic into the scrubbing facility. The good thing about the scrubbing facilities is systems like Riverhead, which is now the Cisco Guard, or Cloud Shield. It's essentially packet rate limiting, which I've always been a strong opponent against it because rate limiting against a destination really doesn't do you any good if it's a critical service. So, but scrubbing facilities kind of take a different perspective. They're now doing packet rates on source addresses. So it's extremely dynamic. They're taking each individual /32 and they're doing a packet rate against it. So if one address goes away and another address comes back, it's still the same destination CIDR, and the rate limiting is going to apply. The scrubbers have capabilities to go into the application layer. They can filter on pretty much any part of the packet that you want to, so you get greater filter capability. So after it goes into the scrubbing facility, then we push it out through an MPLS or through GRE. Because if you're not encapsulating it, it's just going to go right back into the scrubbing facility, right? You're going to have some horrible loop going in there. So MPLS VPN or GRE is normally the accepted way to get it back to the customer. And so now the traffic's going back to the customer and they have clean pipes. So prosecution, the ability to identify and aid in the prosecution of an attacker. Things we look for in prosecution is legal compliancy, rapid response, and internal-external communications. So legal compliancy is to make sure that any information that we're handing over to federal investigators or to the customer goes through legal compliancy. If you do inevitably catch the person who's going to do it, you want to make sure that your information handling is safe and it's in accordance with the people who know the legal system. So we always stress, have a legal compliancy group, or if you have a legal team, try to work it so that they have the capability of taking this information. Because if it's not handled properly, the case is going to fall apart for the federal investigators. Rapid response, going back into all these databases, have this information readily available. Internal, external communications links, networking essentially. Once again, mailing lists like NSPSec. Know who your peers are. Know the contact information. Know who their security professional is. Know who their peering coordinator is. Maybe know who somebody from their PR team, or their public relations team. Know somebody from their legal team, their legal members. Right, Wendy? So supporting data. Trace back data, whether you do this manually or you have a flow information that traces it back up to where it's ingressing at, so I can prove that it's coming from X ISP and it's not spoofed. The metadata that you collected in the course of doing the detection. Collaborative data. If somebody shoots me over a CNC from the NSPSec list. Detection reports. Whatever reports that your detection detects. Packet captures. If you go into the packet, you take a closer look at it, you divert it or something like that, you pull up TCP dump to take a look at it, save it. Timestamps, obviously, most of this data, make sure the data that you're collecting has timestamps of when you collected it. The correlation database, going back into what we're doing for detection, make sure all that information gets populated, and that goes into supporting data. All this information is then handed over to legal compliancy to make sure that the information is correct, handled properly, turned over to the investigators. They furnish subpoenas or court orders to properly obtain the information, and so on. And that's, wow, 45 minutes exactly. Thank you. Any questions? Hey.
you're collecting a lot of information on your network there, and the issue of customer privacy comes up when you're doing this. And how do you handle that when you're doing packet capture and collecting other data?
Right. So we ask permission from the customer before we do anything. In our AUP, and our AUPs are well defined. So like in an instance where we have an MSO customer or a broadband customer that's getting attacked, it's defined in the AUP that if it's impacting our network in any way that we have the right to do those types of captures. For MIS customers, obviously those aren't going to be impacting the network. Or, I mean, they can be, but essentially they aren't. So in those cases, we do ask. We get a hold of the customer and say, we need to do a packet capture for this.
Hey, Tim?
Yeah.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you go over the TCP anycast to BGP for us one more time?
Yeah. So essentially, we're taking 10.10.10.1, and we're putting it on all of our scrubbing facilities. When we send out that next hop update from the BGP router, the next hop is that 10.10.10.1 address. So that way, packets coming in, it's going to follow the BGP megs. And so packets coming in from, AP are going to have a distribution to our West Coast scrubbing facility. Packets coming in from Europe are going to go to our East Coast scrubbing facility.
What happens when you get attacked from China and they're all going to your Los Angeles scrubbing facility? Like, how do you keep one side of your network from getting overwhelmed? Like, how do you...
We haven't had a capacity problem yet. So until that arises, but once again, that's why we're homing it to the OC192 network, is so that we don't want to have to deal with capacity problems.
When you bring your traffic back from your data scrubbing facility, do you have a GRE tunnel for every customer router already set up?
So GRE is one option, and initially if a customer was getting attacked, we would build the GRE tunnel to our access router. That way, we didn't have to have contact the customer, have to know what the customer's capabilities were of doing GRE. The problem we ran into was, some vendors, require a superfluous card in order to do GRE, which we don't have on our access routers. So it's kind of expensive to take up a whole slot on something just to do GRE. So fortunately, we're at a point where we're doing an MPLS build out to all of our access routers. So we've now working on switching all of that over to MPLS, and then it's just a matter of throwing the customer in the VRF. All right, I'm going to go drink some beer. Thank you.